All right, hello and welcome to the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership's Washington Leadership Program. My name is Ching Cha Vang and I serve on CAPAL's Board of Directors. We are a nonprofit that cultivates Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander public service leaders by providing formative professional experiences and growth opportunities through our annual public service scholarship and internship program, roundtable series, mentorship program, and tonight's WLP, or again, Washington Leadership Program. WLP is one of our signature free programs that introduces students to AANHPI leaders in public service who can inform and inspire students their own civic engagement, inspire their own civic engagement. For the first time in CAPAL's history, this summer's WLP series was planned and led by a group of our recent scholar and internship alumni. As a reminder, all WLP sessions are recorded and live streamed to our Facebook page and will be available for later viewing afterwards, including materials. We'll proceed with today's session. No longer your sidekick, AANHPI representation and advocacy in media. This session will address representation from the AANHPI community in the media, as well as how activists and artists are emerging or using their emerging platforms as a means to spread awareness and create change. Topics of discussion include AANHPI narrative building and storytelling in the media, disparities within representation, and avenues in which to advocate for one's community. Panelists will respond to audience's Q&A at the end. Follow and join our conversation tonight on social media using the hashtag #WeAreCapal. Thank you to our speakers and panelists this evening for spending their time with us. And thank you to all of you for joining us. And a very special thank you to our 2022 sponsors for making programs like tonight possible at CAPAL. Now, please give me a warm welcome to CAPAL alumnus Neil DeSantiseo, who serves as Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Department of State and a 2017 CAPAL S&I alumni, who will be our moderator for this panel. Neil will be leading the discussion and the Q&A at the end.
Thanks so much. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to tonight's event. Certainly an exciting one to talk about AANHPI representation and advocacy in the media. Before we get started, I'd love to introduce our panelists, and then we can go from there. And so I'll go ahead in no particular order. We'll start with Frank Chi. Frank is a filmmaker, artist, and storyteller at the intersection of art, politics, and culture. From helping create the notorious RBG phenomenon to his social justice short films, which have gained over 50 million views on social media, Frank's work helps lead narratives around justice and inclusion in American life. His latest work, the documentary short 38 at the Garden about Jeremy Lin's 2012 Insanity Run, just premiered at the 2022 Tribeca Film Festival. Welcome, Frank. All right, we'll move to Curtis Chin. Curtis is a graduate of the Creative Writing Program at the University of Michigan. Curtis has received awards from ABC, Disney Television, New York Foundation for the Arts, National Endowment for the Arts, and more. Chin has screened his films Vincent Who and tested with over 600 entities, 16 countries, including the White House, Amnesty International, and the government of Norway. Co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop, his memoir, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant, will be published by Little Brown in fall 2023. And a new updated fact about Curtis is that he just had 2 articles that were published both in Bon Appetit magazine and Boston Globe. I believe Curtis will be sharing that with you all in the chat if you're interested. Welcome, Curtis. We'll now move to Melissa Bizzani. Melissa is a film curator, consultant, and festival programmer specializing in Indigenous and Asian American film. She's currently the festival director for the DC Asian Pacific American Film Festival. She's also a member of the Four Quarters Collective and a contributing partner in the Asian American Pacific Islander Film Festival Organizers Collaborative. She served for 15 years as a film and video program manager at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, where she continues to work in museum learning and programs. Her other passion, education equity, has given her the opportunity to work with other parents and community leaders advocating for children in the DC public school system through district-wide Head Start, Kindred Communities, and DC PAVE. Welcome, Melissa. And last but not least, I will go ahead and introduce Amrita Collar. Amrita works directly on social strategy, content marketing, and media relations. Prior to joining SALDA, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, she pursued a career in marketing for a variety of fields, including cosmetic dermatology and undergraduate admissions. She's always had a passion for storytelling and building communities on social media platforms. Amrita graduated with a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California, Riverside. Welcome, Amrita. All right, folks, I will go ahead and we can start this discussion tonight. This first question is for all of you, and we can go ahead and we'll go with last first. And so I'll pitch this to you first, Amrita, and then we'll go to the others. But the first question is, what drew you to work in the media landscape? Were there any barriers or obstacles you faced when you first started your career? And if so, how did you overcome them? I think a lot of folks here tonight are potentially interested in this line of work, this field, so would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited to be here. And honestly, my story is typical of a lot of brown girls. I was pre-med in college, switched to marketing and communications because I felt like there was different ways to help people than is originally told. And honestly, it was a really hard decision because my parents are immigrants. And I think that's always a hard adjustment because it's not, they don't see it as something that can be like made out of a career. They're like, social media, why would you do that? But it's really, I saw it as a challenge because instead of an obstacle, because it inspired me to really trailblaze the way for other young girls who wouldn't want to be like, I wouldn't want to put them in that position. So that's what really drew me to marketing communications. And I had the privilege of working with undergraduate admissions for my school. And that kind of really prompted me to go all the way in this field. Yeah.
Great sharing. And Melissa, how about you? What's your story?
Hi. So I'm half Italian and half Japanese. My parents met in Hawaii. And my mom converted to Catholicism to marry my dad. And so I thought for a long, long time that I wanted to be a priest because that was basically what I knew about performance, I think. And I thought, I'm going to be the first female priest. And we had this crazy Japanese church in Manhattan where I was born that was run by these Scottish monks, Franciscan monks. And they always told me, like when I asked, like, why can't I be a priest? They're like, well, you can't perform the sacraments. So when I was a kid, I was like, I'm going to perform the sacraments. And that was my deal. Like, I was going to learn how to do the mass. I memorized it. I was going to be a priest. Nobody was on my side. And then I realized, oh, I think I want to be an actor. Like my mom took me to a play and I was like, oh, I want to be an actor. And my mom got me like involved in, local theater in Queens. But I understudied for a bunch of stuff and only ever got cast. This is like as a little kid in South Pacific, of course, And it was an upward battle from that point. I worked in film production as a teenager. My older brother, Micah, who's a cameraman in Los Angeles now, he was in the same boat as I was. He wanted to be an actor and couldn't get any jobs. Understudied on Broadway even, but couldn't get any jobs. Was an apprentice at the Actors Studio, couldn't get any jobs. He ended up working on films below the line and would just hire me on different projects. So like starting at 15, I started working in film in New York. Back in the day, you could just walk into the Film Commission office and see jobs on a board and, PA. so yeah, I did that. And then I realized that a lot of what I wanted to do was prevent other people from having the same struggle in the media field that I had. And so, yeah, that's how I kind of specialized. But I also was like very mathy. I was a very mathy person. I thought I was going to go into research science as an adult, but got drawn into the arts. And yeah, all these years later, I'm still here. My parents, I guess they were very supportive of creativity. Like even in Frank, in your film, Jeremy Lin talking about his mom wanting him to play piano. It's like, yeah, you can be a lawyer and play piano. You know, that kind of was, I think, my parents' deal too. I didn't even know until just a couple years ago, talking to my grandmother in Japan, and me asking her, like, what did you want me to be? And she said, I wanted you to be an actor. And I was shocked. And I said to her, like, had I known that, maybe I would have stuck through with it. But, so I'm in this weird niche job now where I work at the Smithsonian. So it's also like Asian American parents, by and large, are okay with that. The Smithsonian looks good on a resume. And I'm like tangentially in the arts. But trying to support diverse stories.
Love it. I think there's a pattern that's starting to occur about sort of trailblazing, wanting things not to be as difficult for folks who come after us. So thank you for sharing that. Curtis, would love to hear from you on this question of, what drew you to this space?
Well, thank you, Kapal, for organizing this, and pleasure to share the screen with the fellow panelists today. You know what? I really don't know how I ended up here, to be honest with you. So my backstory is that, I'm from Detroit, and I didn't even want to go to college, but my parents sort of pressured me to go in to school. So I ended up going to the University of Michigan. It was a good local school. And I didn't know what I was going to study. And I started taking poetry writing classes because they sort of fit into my schedule, where I was working, and I was getting pretty good grades in it. And so I applied to get into the creative writing program there. It was a pretty exclusive group with like only 20 students that they accepted each year. And so I graduated a creative writing degree, and I didn't know what I was going to do with that. So I moved to New York. And my first job was literally standing in the middle of Times Square, passing out flyers, trying to get people to go to a Broadway show. I was working in the Asian American nonprofit scene because I'd done a lot of that stuff in college, like student activism. And so, I had internships at both the Pan Asian Repertory Theater and the Museum of Chinese in America. And from there, I learned a little bit about arts administration. And I think within a year, I left to go co-found an organization called the Asian American Writers Workshop, which if you guys haven't heard about it and you aspire to be a writer, it really, really is a wonderful organization that's just doing kick-ass stuff. It's the Asian American Writers Workshop. Please look them up. And I worked there for a number of years, mostly as an administrator. Being the first executive director, I was still writing myself. In fact, I won a major poetry award from the New York Foundation for the Arts, I think at the age of 25. So I was trying to balance both being a writer and then also working in the arts to sort of, make a living. After I won that big award, I was able to quit my day job. And what did I do with that money? I met a boy and moved out to Los Angeles. I left New York. And fortunately, we're still together. But when I was out here, again, I didn't know what I was going to do out here. And so I started working as an assistant on TV shows, writer's assistant, things like that. And eventually got freelance episodes to write shows, and then won the ABC Disney Fellowship, which is a prestigious writing fellowship. And from that, I was staff for a number of years on TV shows. And then, I was having a pretty good life then, but then my dad sadly was in a car accident back in Detroit, and he passed away, and I had to go back home. And that's when I was thinking, well, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to just continue staying in Hollywood writing for the Disney Channel, or do I, do something more meaningful with my life? Not that that's not meaningful. I don't want to disparage that. side of the business. But I decided to make social justice documentaries because it sort of mirrored the things that I really enjoyed, which is, the community work, but also being creative. And then I thought back to a case that really had an impact on me growing up, which was the Vincent Chin case, because he was a family friend. My uncle was his best man. And so I decided to pursue making this film. I'd never done anything like this before, an independent film. I'd even tell my agent about it because he would have said, come back to Hollywood, the networks want to put you on another show. It's not a problem getting you another job, but my heart just wasn't into it. And I really want to do something that was more for my community. And that's when I made this film called Vincent Who, which looks at the Vincent Chin case and the impact that it's had on the development of an Asian American movement. And I really didn't know what was going to come of the film. I was just going to make it. But, as soon as people started hearing I was making this film, so many people came out of the woodwork to offer their help. People were saying, oh, I'd be happy to be interviewed. This one guy in San Francisco said, hey, I heard you're making this film. I'll raise all the money for you. I was like, be my guest. And he did. He raised all the money for me. I ended up touring that film to over 500 schools, in 44 states and like 12 countries or so. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm not a TV writer anymore. I'm a documentary filmmaker. And so I started making documentaries. I made another one called Tested, which looks at, again, the New York City public school system and the issue of diversity, because that's something I'm very curious about, is racial diversity. And that one I also went to about 300 or 400 schools too, in another bunch of countries. And so I've been able to travel the world. It's been really wonderful to have these conversations. And then most recently with COVID, because I was stuck here and I couldn't do any film production, I started writing my memoir, or I picked up a memoir project that I had been dabbling about, but I really got serious about it. And I ended up selling it to Little Brown, which I think is the second largest publisher in the world. They have people like J.K. Rowling, James Patterson, David Sedaris, like a lot of big name writers. And so that book is going to come out in fall 2023. It's a book called Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. And it's about growing up Asian in the very black and white city of Detroit, but then also coming out to my immigrant family. And then what else? And I have a short film that I took from some of the footage that I've been shooting before COVID. And I made a film called Dear Corky, which looks at the very well-regarded, very important Asian American photographer, Corky Lee. And so that's, debuted, I think about a month ago at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival. And it's going to be shown at the DC Film Festival, Asian American Film Festival coming up. And so I've been doing that. And so, yeah, just really busy. So, but straddling the worlds of both, activism and arts, working for the large mainstream companies, like Disney and Hachette, but also then trying to stay grounded in my roots to the community. That's sort of what I'm interested in, is like, how can you do both? So I'm looking forward to this conversation with you all. So, and I'll post the links to my articles afterwards, because I don't want you guys to read it while we're in this session. So I'll post them at the end. Okay, thanks.
Good. Thank you, Curtis. I mean, I love it. It's got love. It's got Hollywood and New York. And I think the other thing that I noticed is that link between activism and the arts, and how important that can be in shaping people's views in society. And so thank you for talking about that. Hoping we can expand on that in this conversation. Frank, how about you?
Right. So I think, it's interesting. I've traversed not as many worlds as Curtis, I think, but I went back between art and politics for a really long time. And I think a lot of it has just to do with the sense of belonging. I am an immigrant kid. I came here when I was 7. I was born in Beijing. And when I got here, there was not like a day in my life that I felt like I belong here. Like from the day I got here, probably until the night that Barack Obama gave his speech at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. Like, I can recite that speech by heart. And even though he was not of my background, when you say a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too, like, that speech just, it changed my life. And I went from somebody who like just saw no place for me here to being like a hardcore like political junkie, I worked for his campaign. When I graduated from college in 2007, I went straight to the campaign trail. I worked on the Obama media team, and I began a career in politics, and I loved it. But I think I loved it not because of the reason why people traditionally get into politics, because for me, it was a sense of belonging for the first time. I mean, that was true for so many people who got into politics because of Obama, right? And I loved that life. I kept on making political ads. I got really deep into design and like especially digital design. And I started my own firm, and we had clients that we were really proud to work for. Like, I think probably my favorite political experience was in 2012. I worked for Elizabeth Warren when she first ran for Senate. And like I feel like that got to the point where, like, whether it was Obama or Warren or the other clients I worked for, and me and my friends, we just casually put together like a project that took off in 2013 called Notorious RBG that like went on for 7 years, right? Like I love telling other people's stories, and I was comfortable doing it, and that's sort of what politics will provide for you, if you're comfortable with it, right? But here's the thing, right? Like, how many people in politics look like people here? Like, I mean, I spent 15 years in politics, and I can probably still count how many people I met who were like staffers. I mean, it's growing for sure, and places like Paul help it grow, but it's too. We all know what it is. And when the Obama era was over, and we were dealing with a lot more of a hostile place, still about belonging, about people who don't want to share America with people who look like this. I just got a little bit less interested in the things that brought me into politics in the first place. And I wanted to do more cultural projects. Melissa mentioned the Smithsonian. One of the first sort of cultural projects that I did intentionally was a short film called Letters from Camp with Smithsonian APA Center. And it was young Muslim Americans reading letters written by like young Japanese American kids who were incarcerated in camps in World War II. And they read them while like a survivor of the camp sat next to them, right? And that was like the first moment where I was like, oh, actually, like all the skills that I learned in politics that I used to tell other people's stories, other communities' stories, like this is the time to like, one, actually try to tell stories from my community in a way that I feel like is impactful, and two, put my name on the end of it, right? Like I just never thought about doing that until 2016. Like, a lot of things happened in 2016. And I've just, it's been a string of stories, whether it's mine or, like helping other communities tell their stories that I've done since then. And my most recent project is with Jeremy, the one that Neil mentioned, is called 38 at the Garden. We just premiered at Tribeca, and it was awesome. And it was one of those moments where, like, the movie comes out in October on HBO, so folks will get a chance to watch. If you live in DC and you're there mid-July, you'll get a chance to watch it if you talk to Melissa. It's actually, if you live in Austin, it's playing at the Austin Asian American Festival this Saturday. So if you look it up, you'll get a chance to watch it. But we're going to make sure all the Asian American film festivals get first look at it before it premieres on HBO in the fall. But like that movie, I always put it this way, and I'm sure if you were in college right now and you're thinking about a career like this and you feel like it's intimidating because it doesn't look like there's a clear path for people, like when you are an Asian American storyteller, you're told two things and they're direct conflict with each other, right? The first is that the person who's most powerful, so tell what you know, right? And the second is what American society at large tells you, which is that nobody cares about your story, you're invisible in this country, right? And those two things are just in direct conflict with each other. And it's terrifying, it's intimidating to get into a field where you feel that way. This is the first moment, whether it's me being able to make this movie or Jenny Han being able to make The Summer I Turned Pretty, which just premiered on Prime, or Ms. Marvel, which just premiered on Disney Plus, right? Like this is the first moment where I get to see people not just casting someone who's Asian in a role that might have not gone to an Asian person before in a story, not about Asian people, but telling Asian stories, right? And I think it's really exciting that that conflict that I had to live with my whole life is, it's not going away, but it's starting to fade a little bit. And that's a really exciting moment. I mean, I feel it in the work that I'm doing. I mean, Jeremy's story is a complete Asian American story, but it's one that everybody's obsessed with. And, you know, Melissa, I think, is the only one that has a chance to see it. But like it really, it's the most personal story I've ever had a chance to tell. And it is so much about representation that you're not even probably thinking about Jeremy or about basketball at the end of the movie. It's about us, right? And that's why, I mean, this is such an exciting moment for people who are wanting to get into this industry, because we are seeing shifts. Some of it is because, like, I think Hollywood is like sort of terrified about what's happening to Asian Americans right now, which is true because, you know, this is a really awful time. So people feel compelled to make sure that, like, there's a spotlight on stories. But like, if we keep on pushing, if we keep on making sure that, like, urgency doesn't come from violence and from people feeling like the need to make sure Asian people are told, but like just making sure that we feel like a natural part of the fabric of this country, we're going to keep on seeing progress.
Thank you, Frank. I love
Can
that
I jump
idea
in
that
and say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, Neil, you had a comment though.
Oh no, I was just saying that idea of that sense of belonging, and I was a former speechwriter, so that speech by Obama in 2004 is something that I return to quite often. So certainly that resonates with me. And yes, I think this by using art and media, there's a lot to be said about how can we make our society better. Melissa, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's funny because in our film program, we have 2 films that very specifically talk about whiteness and little kids searching for belonging and thinking that means changing their skin color. And this is, we get 1 or 2 of these films every single year. And for me, even though that wasn't exactly my experience, it really hits me in the heart every single time. But this year, for the first time, the programmers were looking at each other like, is this still relevant to high school kids or to middle school kids? Do they feel that way? Because, my 7-year-old goes to a DC public school, and I'm shocked at the mixed race kids, the numbers, where, yeah, I went to school with 7 other mixed race kids, but they were all my siblings, So it's just a little bit of a different world, and it's so exciting. I'm so excited by that, So yeah, I'm hoping that we keep on this trajectory, and not, like Frank said, just because we're living through a violent moment where everybody's hyper aware because of violence.
Can I respond also to what Frank was saying? Yeah, I agree that we're living in a particular moment, but I'd also compare it to, say, like when I first was trying to break into Hollywood, mainstream Hollywood 20 years ago, it was a completely different world, right? Where you could not even think of pitching an Asian American project. Like, I'd always be the only person of color on staff, not just writing, but even craft service. It was like all white, like, and so looking at it now, it is so, I don't want to say it's easy, because these jobs are always difficult, but I feel like it's much more easier. And the idea that you can tell an authentic Asian American story in a mainstream platform seems much, much more possible these days. And I think that I differ a little bit from what Frank is saying, in the sense of where maybe they think there's an urgency because of the hate crimes. I actually think it's more because of the streaming services, and how, the distribution channels have completely changed, where, back in the old days when I was trying to first break in, there were so few jobs, so few shows, right? But now you have 300-400 shows in production now. I just think that they're desperate for content. I mean, I think that's actually what's driving it. That's why so many shows are getting done. And it's not like you have to come up with 4 seasons of 24 episodes to get into syndication. You can do 2 or 3 seasons with only 6 episodes or 8 episodes. And that makes it much more plausible for people like us and creators like us to actually get our projects greenlit. right? The finances are a little bit different because you're not going to make as much money, but you can still make a living. So there are changes in that sense. And the other thing that I'd like to say is that I think one of the really exciting things about all these changes is that the sense of Asian Americans wanting to work together. You know what I mean? Like the different parts of our community, you know, the artists are all really trying to collaborate on so many different projects together, you know, and I don't know if you would have seen that 20 years ago, where maybe there was this mentality more where like, okay, I'm the one Asian that's going to get this job, you know, and there's a little bit more competition it's sensed between, you know, thing. But now I think that our community recognizes that maybe we don't necessarily need to just pursue, you know, that white mainstream audience, that there may be enough critical numbers of Asian Americans to actually put together projects. And because the metrics have fallen where you maybe only need 2 or 3 million viewers to be successful, these are numbers that we can achieve on our own that we don't necessarily need from outside communities. And so I think just to all the people here that are thinking about pursuing careers in this, you know, this is a really great time. I mean, you know, and I just want to encourage you that if you feel like you have a story to tell, you know, I don't think there's been a better time. So
I will say this.
Yeah.
Inbox that month after the Atlanta shootings happened, because that's why I say it like that.
Okay.
You know, because my inbox didn't look like that before that awful event. And that's why, like, I mean, I say it, one, I agree with you that like streamers are definitely changing the game, but I have a skeptical view of it because of that experience. I was just like, wait, what? Like all these projects that I wanted to pitch for all this time, I mean, there was tepid experience, and all of a sudden April 2021 happens and oh, okay, you're interested. Why? Right. So like, look, I don't say that in a way that's like, I just think Hollywood's incapable of change. I just say that like this is the age that we live in, right? And I think we just need to like have 360 lens on how we're viewing all this. But anyway,
I think it's also really not great to say like, oh, now we have our own numbers, you know, like we don't have to look for a white audience, because that's how Hollywood treated us since the beginning. Like, oh, you don't have enough members of your community to watch this show to generate money for us. And meanwhile, I have to watch shows that are fully staffed by white people, written by white people, even, you know, shows with Asian content or Black content or Native American content that are picked up, produced, written by white people, you know. So no, I mean, time for white people, to become our audience, you know. And I think like, the streamers are great, but if the producers had to pay out what they paid out, you know, when there were only 5 networks, would they let us get jobs? And the truth is that the gatekeepers are still primarily white. You know, and so I don't want us to be grasping for crumbs. I think that the real eye opener is happening from both this, you know, this moment of people identifying and seeing Asian hate and having this outlet of the streaming services. I think that is giving us an opportunity to show that we have more than 12 stories or 13 stories that every sitcom has shown since time immemorial. Like, let's all have a show where the main character gets pregnant, even though that main character is a dog, you know? Like, now they realize, okay, Asian Americans have really interesting stories that we've never heard about. Like, this is why they have to lean into it, because people are freaking bored by what they're seeing on TV. My former colleague who's Native American, who has her own show now called Rutherford Falls, she used to joke that, you know, the Bechdel test for whether a show or a film was racist was if you could replace the main character with a puppy, then it's racist. You know? So like, so many, when you revisit all those shows, like Different Strokes, could you replace those main characters with puppies? Yeah, you could. Pretty racist, you know, even though we were grasping at straws as kids to look for shows and want shows like that, you know? But now we are, because we actually have authentic stories that are interesting and we are creative. Like now the industry, I think, is just opening their eyes to like, oh, this is so interesting. This is something I haven't heard before. And I think other people are gonna, shell out money to hear the story too.
I know this is a fantastic, discussion on this. And you all are actually preempting my question about how the representation of AANHPI community has changed over the years. And I think it's interesting that you do talk about sort of this idea of like catalyst moments. Do they last? Are folks going to permanently change and lead more into giving more opportunities to communities that haven't been adequately represented in the past? And related to that, I'll go ahead and move to the next question. And Amrita, I would love to hear your voice on this one. So this question, I'll start with you, and then folks, if you want to add in as well. The term AANHPI encompasses a variety of communities, experiences, etc. In your view, do you feel there are any disparities within the community itself in terms of media representation and portrayal, and the implications of that? Are there voices from the community that aren't being given as much visibility, and what can be done about that? So Amrita, would love to hear that from you.
Yeah, great question. I'm a Sikh American woman, and I feel like within the Sikh American community, women are most often, we don't know what their story is. After 9/11, there was this image of like the turban, patriotic man, but I feel like the women's voices kind of got lost in that. What can we do about it? That's a tough question, but I think within my role, what I try to do is, even looking around through my staff, we had like a whole thing about who our board members were and like the volunteers, but looking around the staff, there were like 90% women. So, coming in and even highlighting the fact, like having the first female executive director in 25 years, that's like very impressive. And it was empowering to work in that kind of community and to even like encourage that person to even speak up about that story. For her, it might not have been a big deal, but even for me, like coming from India, I was like, I didn't even know like a female leader could be in charge of like directly empowering Sikh Americans, and part of her work now is just highlighting those stories of women. So yeah, that's who I would say it was like most often the voices are kind of muted. So I think generally with most campaigns, it's really about giving a voice to that. It's easy to like go to the main influencers and like the people we've all heard of, and but now the challenge is really like, we know about the turban man, like what else is there, and expanding that image, because I think it's been tired and run through. So
Thank you for that. And yeah, I would love to hear other folks on the panel at this idea of intersectionality. What other identities within the community can be uplifted, and wanted to see if you all had perspectives on that.
Well, I mean, I can speak to at least for one of the projects I worked on, which was Vincent Who, which looked at the impact it had on the development of an Asian American political movement afterwards. So we really wanted to have a diverse group of Asian Americans in that production, because that's, maybe we were thinking like that wasn't the reality of where the activism was at that point, but maybe where we would like to see it. And so we have a very broad, group of speaking heads in that film, not just the traditional, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, Indian, but even, people from Bangladesh, people from Pakistan, people from, the Hmong population, so we really made sure that we were as inclusive as possible. Could we have done a better job? Yeah, I think so. In retrospect, maybe we could have had a couple more, Vietnamese American. We had Vietnamese American representation, but maybe a few more would have been stronger. I mean, I think it's something we always think about. And, sometimes we do a better job than other times, but as long as we keep trying, I think that's the most important thing. So.
It's funny. In 38 The Garden, Hassan Minhaj is in it, and so is Ronnie Chang. The two of them, this happened at Tribeca. It just happened on social media, but like they constantly joke that like, why are we in the same category as people? Like that's like one of the continuous jokes that they make at each other during the promoting of this movie. And it's like sort of funny in the sense that like, I think we're all making fun of the fact that like, look, this is a political category. We are a coalition to strengthen our political voice in this country, to make sure that we get what we deserve, right? But that doesn't mean, because so much of this is first generation, that doesn't mean that there is like a lot of natural cultural coherence that's already there for us to be like, oh yeah, we're all part of the same. Like you ask my parents will never accept that they're in the same category as Indian immigrants. Like they will never compute it. It's just never gonna happen, right? So like, I think for like my generation, the next generation, like it is our job to like create more cultural coherence for a political category. If that makes any sense, right? And like whether that's through jokes or whether that's just through like doing what Curtis was describing, just like making sure that we're all together, right? Making sure we're all like allied and advocating for something that we all obviously believe in. Like it takes time. It takes time to make a cultural coherence out of a political category that a lot of people like. Look, I'll be totally like, I mean, this, we're all amongst ourselves. Like I've had like Pacific Islanders tell me that they don't identify with me because the colonizers of their land before white people were Asian empires. So why would they do that? And like, you know, like I don't know how to respond to that other than being like, I'm sorry. Like, so like it's just not it's not a completely coherent, like they identify as indigenous. Oh, I'm Asian American or I'm indigenous. Like, I don't know why I aren't all categorized this way. Like that's the anger part of that conversation. Whereas like Hassan and Ronnie can have the humor part of that conversation, right? And I think we just need to recognize all of these different voices and the fact that like a lot of people agree, a lot of people disagree. And we are still very much in like the blueprint of figuring out what a cultural identity for this political category is.
Can I respond to that? I think you're very right about that, because you can't have a political movement if people don't feel like they're part of a community, if they don't feel united. And that's why creative types, are very important, because we're the ones who are creating that sense of community. We're the ones who are telling the stories and giving a sense of, well, what does it mean to be Asian American? Because it is kind of a nebulous term, right? But that's why we're so important. You can have film festivals, you can have books, you can have all these things that make people start to feel like, okay, I get it. I can picture what an Asian American is. The other thing I would add is that, yes, it started from a political thing. But, as we get older and our communities, have more ties with each other, it does become a real community. But it's also something that other community goes through too. This is not unique to Asian Americans. Latinos do it, Blacks do it, whites do it. They were not unified communities themselves either. They had to go through this process of understanding that, yes, white people are more politically unified if they are all together, as opposed to being, Scots and Germans and whatever, So we're no different than anybody else. So. Yeah.
Well, it took white people a couple hundred years to get on the same page. Like I don't know if you've ever seen this documentary, 9500 Liberty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about, profiling of Asian Americans made the film, but it's about profiling of Hispanics in Manassas, Virginia. And this white woman gets up she's got a baby on her hip and she's reading a newspaper clipping from the Baltimore Sun from like 100 years ago. And it's like, the article, it's just going down this laundry list. Like their food stinks, they're singing in the middle of the night, there's 100 people living in the house, all, in 3 rooms. And then she's like, and at the end you find out it's about Italians. And she's there because her husband is Hispanic and, has been profiled, and she's like part of the Latino community at the same time as she's a white woman. She's like, we didn't have it together either. And who would ever say that Italian food isn't American food today, And this was just in the late 1800s or whatever. I think that like part of the problem, and the story you recount, Frank, too, is that so many of our communities, like the first generation here, comes out of a really traumatic experience, whether it's a war or partition or, and we're coming from people who have just like kept their trauma really close to the heart and have not shared it, it comes out in us in many different ways. And of course, you know, Hawaiians have their own traumas. But you know, it makes me think again about like the comments about Asian Americans. Curtis, you're saying like Asian Americans now wanting to work together. It's like, well, there's some things that we can get around, right? Or that we can be all, we are all already on the same track about, like, you feed each other, like someone's doing you a favor and showing up on set for you. You're gonna get them the best food you possibly can. You're not gonna, you know, you're not gonna come out with peanut butter and jelly, you know. We all can rally around that, and comedy is another point. You know, we can all rally around a good time. We need that, you know. That's the only thing that we can all be assured of, maybe, is like we don't know why we're here, but maybe we can all strive towards happiness, you know. And it just takes a little bit of, like, you know, cracking the shell for us to think like, yeah, I don't just want it for myself, I want it for everybody, and I want to build community around happiness and success. And you know, and I think a lot of that is from breaking away from this European model of, you know, being egocentric. You know, I think about, there's so many films right now about maternal health, especially in Black communities. But you think about, for example, like what it's like for any of us in our traditional cultures for a woman to give birth, and how that is so much about community and her sisters and her aunties and everyone's taking care of her. And here you're in a bleach smelling room with strangers who are not even looking you in the eye, just looking at your body. And the person who's like with you and touching you the most is a white dude. You know, it's like, we're finally like, I'm not going to accept that to be American. I can be American at the same time as I reject that, and I continue with my family and existing community in, you know, in carrying on our cultural traditions.
Almost as you sort of tell that story, I'm interested in exploring the linkage between storytelling and empowering communities. So I'd love to hear if you have an example or a personal experience that you'd like to share with the group about seeing the impact that storytelling or media has had to create change or empower folks in under-resourced or overlooked communities.
I actually have a campaign that goes along well with that prompt, and it's one of my favorite campaigns that I worked on and led. It was 9 Lives Affected by 9/11. Last year was the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So it was really about, you know, we've heard about the obstacles, we've heard about the hate crimes that Sikh Americans face, being mistaken for like the Muslim identity, you know, and the turban was like it's one of our 5 articles of faith. So it was really about like kind of changing that narrative to be like, okay, well, we experienced hate crimes, what came out of that? And, you know, we featured 9 basically Sikh Americans who talked about like out of obstacle, there was so much activism that was inspired. You know, SALDEF was born out of that in 1996, but switched its name from SMART to SALDEF to kind of, you know, be there and like correct misrepresentation, how we were being reported in the media, how we were being seen in the newsletters. And those are stories, like honestly, even conducting the interviews, I'd never heard about. So it was really, really empowering to see, you know, we have this like phrase called Chardi Kala, which is basically like relentless optimism, and how you can just, it's not just about being positive, it's about using your obstacles in a positive sense to inspire change as a community, you know? So yeah, that was one of my favorite campaigns that we worked on.
Excellent. Other folks on the panel, any campaigns or videos, films, books, anything that you'd like to share?
I feel like we've been, I mean, I'm gonna keep on plugging 30 at the Garden if you let me.
Go for it.
I will say one of my art projects that I'm really, and we actually, this was super dope because we sort of just put an end to this. About 3 years ago, I worked with a friend of mine named Eric Euler, who's an artist, on a painting called American Gothic X. And it's the story of Yuri Kochiyama's friendship with Malcolm X. I mean, Yuri Kochiyama, we all know her as like, you know, like one of the preeminent Asian American activists, right? And she is the one that's holding Malcolm's head, you know, when he's dying in that photo. And they had a beautiful friendship. I mean, it really, like, there's plays about it. Like, I'm working on something related to it, but like it's just like, it was one of those like it was one of those like intersectional allyship stories that will really just hit you out of nowhere, because it, you know, like, I don't think people associate Malcolm with that, right? So we made a painting where it was like American Gothic, but it was Malcolm and Yuri behind them are the Manhattanville projects, which is where they met. And it really struck a chord with people in a way that, like, I mean, like, you put a painting together and you put on, you know, I don't think people are like, yo, like, that's gonna slap. Like, people who predict that, like, don't know what they're talking about, honestly. Like, you never know how that's gonna go, especially with something that's a still, you know, that's a graphic, that's a painting. And it sort of just took a life on its own every May 19th, which is both their birthdays, which is how they like connected. It floods social media, especially Instagram, as like a visual medium for a lot of activism now. And Kemi Kochiyama, who is Yuri's granddaughter, who is the executor of the will, for May 19th this year, was just like, hey, I want to tell you about something. I was like, okay, cool, because like I commissioned it. It was just like hanging in my office for a couple years, and she was like, you know, the Audubon Ballroom, which is where Malcolm X was assassinated, where Yuri's holding his head, is now the Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz Center. So the family sort of took it over and turned it into a place of love, of celebration. It's really beautiful. And they have all kinds of art that's displayed there. They turned the place where the podium was into a huge mural of Malcolm X's life. And they were like, they would like to hang American Gothic X at the Audubon Ballroom, like a permanent place. And that, like, it blew me away. And you go on my Instagram, I put up photos of it, but they had a big May 19th celebration. It was part of their celebration. And now if you want to see American Gothic X, it's at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, in New York. And it gives me chills every single time I say it. So yeah, that's my other recent favorite project.
Well, I can just talk about films in general. I mean, you know, with the Vincent Chin case, I don't think if, you know, Christine Choi and Renee Tajima Pena hadn't made, you know, Who Killed Vincent Chin all those years ago, if people would even remembered it, right? Because such a whole generation of people became activists because of that film, right? I don't know how people would have heard about it. It would have been lost to history, right? And even when we made our film, Vincent Who, you were starting to feel that way, because that film at that point was starting to feel a little bit old because of the music, because of the style, and you know, people were disconnected from it. And that's why we wanted to make another film. It wasn't necessary to say like we're a follow-up to it, but we tried to look at the one silver lining that came out of the case, you know, because there never was any justice for Vincent, right? I mean, you know, the killers never served a day in jail. They didn't pay up, you know, the fine that they agreed to, and so it was just a lot of loss. And so for us, the one silver lining was this notion that the community started to come together, and that's what we sort of hooked our film on, and talked about how did, you know, this Asian American movement come about. And so for us, our film deliberately was a rallying call. It was designed for college students to energize their campuses, to mobilize. And so because of that, I've been approached by so many people who, you know, afterwards have gone on to careers, you know, doing activism and politics and stuff like that, and thanking us, you know, for the film. And, you know, sometimes I feel guilty because it's like, I know it's a tough life to do work in politics. I'm like, oh, maybe you should have been a doctor or whatever, but, you know, but yeah, so I think in that sense, you know, film and any type of media is really, really important for capturing our stories and, you know, helping to build that sense of community, you know, as we were talking about earlier. And I think every film that can do that, you know, even like, say, you know, Melissa mentioning a film from a few years ago, we remember these films and they capture the stories and they keep us going. So, yeah.
I mean, it's funny because as a kid, I didn't watch a lot of films. I think I saw 3 films in the movie theater before I was like 15. I was working on a lot of films before I'd even seen a lot of films because my family was interested in technology, like, so from that side. But because of my day job and, well, not just my day job, I just started becoming interested in what was out there. Like at the same time that I was working in film, you have all these like film nerds from that just came out of college and they're all talking about whatever films, and in my own college, like our film club, I was always involved in like the film club, but then I'm just like, what is out there that Asian Americans have made? And it wasn't even just Asian Americans, it was minorities, because my brother, like coming out of the actor studio, his bestie was an African American. As far as representation goes, that's who I identified with, was African Americans, without even really knowing, like that was what was happening to me. But people with specific culture that leaned into their specific cultures and exhibited culture freely. I think maybe that was what I connected to, but I also grew up in Queens, so there was a lot of African Americans around me. But like, this is another messed up thing from like growing up in Queens. Like our parish was, our Catholic parish was mostly Italian and Irish, but there were Jamaicans and Jamaican Chinese and Puerto Ricans. So like, I didn't know that race was a thing. I wondered, like I learned about race in high school in a morality and social justice class. So like that was an eye opener for me. Like, yeah, I know we're different because your mom can't cook. But I didn't realize that it was like a skin color thing. But at the same time, like in my insides were yearning for something else aside from just seeing white faces on the screen. And so I just really started looking for, the canon of minority films, I guess. And so I don't know, my brain is so full of films. There's so many different things that I can mention. Like even I can't have a conversation. Like there aren't many anecdotes from my life that aren't like hanging on a reference to a film, a documentary, or like even a narrative film. But I'm just so like, now in the film festival world, things have shifted so much where, it used to be 50-50 films by non-community members, but featuring maybe some faces on the screen, or something was written by an Asian American but not directed, and no Asian American faces on screen. But now it's the balance has been tipped, and I think we have like 2 films by non-Asian Americans. Last year we had 2 films and one was by an African American, so things are shifting. I'm like, wow, these are the stories. We're finally getting to see a plethora of stories that we want to tell. Not that someone from the outside is like, oh, this is interesting. No, it's like, these are our stories, both in documentary and narrative. Like, these are the stories we want to tell. Like the Corky Lee, like it would have taken another 50 years for, a white photographer to find Corky Lee one day and then say 2 hours later, I should make a documentary about this person, rather than like having this influential person that like affected our lives just in representation in media because he was capturing the pictures that others were not capturing. And like then to see that story on screen from an inside perspective is glorious, and having things in a film that you're leaving for whatever audience is watching it, you're not having to spell everything out for them. You're like, I'm not going to tell you, you experience this story. If you're curious about something, Google it. How about that? Try to find the answer on your own, because we can't take our story time up in explaining every little petty thing to you. So
that's a really good point. I feel like it is through these stories and like the visual mediums where, a lot of people might not know what Sikh Americans are, or like Bengali people are, but at the end of the day, they know emotions, they know anger, sadness, and all we can hope for is that emotion sparks their curiosity to get educated. So it's a really good point.
Love that. And I really love that idea of, you know, these are the stories that we want to tell. Absolutely. It looks like we're going to shift into the Q&A quite soon. I think we have one question in the Q&A right now, but I'd love to ask this question before I get to some of the others. Hopefully folks have some that they'd like to add to the Q&A function, but I'll go ahead and ask this one for you folks. And this is for perhaps some of the people in the audience who are certainly interested in the line of work that you do. So is there any advice or takeaways you would give towards someone who may be considering a future career in media or the arts or anything related to that? Frank, I'd love to hear from you first.
I would say it's really easy to doubt yourself. You get I mean, just in general, like it's true, like for anyone, but like I think if you had any sense of like an Asian American experience, like especially like first generation experience, like, you know, like based on the fact that you feel like you might not belong, like it's just really, really easy. I know I did plenty, even though I became like a nutcase after that Obama speech, like I still like found moments like where I doubted myself, but like you just have to show people how passionate you are about whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's, you know, like no matter what part of the industry you want to be in, just show how passionate you are and like apply to everything that you feel like might help get you to where you want to be one day. And if you have to take no for an answer, move right on to something else that you think you stand a better chance at. Like I don't like, I've had plenty of people, especially in my early 20s, say no to me. But I never let any of those things crush me, right? And I think it's just really easy. And I saw a lot of my friends, I mean, people don't even know what's happening to them. Like they come really close to something that they feel like they really want. They don't get it. And then they end up getting something that's like so below their level, right? So not what they want to do. And like, it's just, I mean, I want people to really think through that and just not hold on to the nose the way that I think so many people who look like this hold on to it through in previous generations.
Can I say something to that? I feel like Frank and I are in kindred spirit because I feel like we have a lot of the same philosophies. But you know, one of the things that I always say to people is that in these creative fields, you're going to hear a lot of no's, right? But don't let your voice be one of them. You know, give yourself permission to say yes. Say yes to yourself all the time. You know, and even if it takes you a long time to get that yes, you know, or if you're hearing these no's, figure out how to get that. You know, but don't stop yourself. Don't sell yourself short. So.
I would add to that, like for me, it's always about building community. You know, be kind to the people around you, you know, and if you're hurting because of no's, other people around you are hurting because of no's too, you know, and even the people who don't seem to be, they're hiding it, you know. I live by this adage that there's room at the top for all of us. None of us wants to do the same thing. So there's room at the top for all of us, you know? And also, sometimes when you're younger, just the experience of life limits what you think, you know, a job can be. Like I never thought that film programming was a job. It was something that I fell into. And now, like, you know, I have like fourth graders come for career day and they're like, with their little notepads, like, okay, what do you do? And I'm like, you know, you go to the movies and your favorite Spider-Man film is playing. Someone picked that film to play in this theater. Someone had to watch that film, pick it, and then program it into, they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, so I watch movies for a living and I pick which ones I think other people should see. And they're like, their minds are blown, you know? And I'm like, you see this building? Building this building was somebody's job. That could be your job, you know? Like I grew up with all these kids that always wanted to customize cars. And I was like, you could be the person who makes cars. You know, you can be designing the cars for everybody else. That's a job. Everything, making a lamp, making a laptop, that's a job for somebody. You know, designing these things, those are jobs. Like, think like, you know, that's one of the things also with the decline of like apprenticeships in the film industry. That's a little bit weird because now it's so much about like going to the right school or knowing the right people or whatever. But you might not know that what you want to be is a script supervisor, because all you ever hear about is like writer directors, you know. In our community, producers are so needed because a producer will support the dreams of a director, support the vision of a director. And when you don't have producers that understand what the F you're saying, you know, like, it can take up so much time and be so frustrating. You know, you need people who have a, you know, the same or similar or have knowledge of your cultural background in order to help support a creative idea. So, you know, production, being a producer on that side, it's also something to think about. You don't have to be a writer director, and oftentimes you get to keep your anonymity, which can be really nice.
So not just the depth of something, think of the breadth of opportunities that you might be able to pursue out there. Amrita, is there anything you'd like to add to that? I do have another question for you, if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all these sentiments. I couldn't said it better myself. I think there's a quote that I used in my middle school, like graduation speech, that I've stuck by. It's like, do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there's no path and leave a trail. You know, you might be the first one in your family trying to go onto these fields, and you're really blazing and trailblazing a new territory, you know. And if you believe in yourself, I wholeheartedly believe like you can lead the way for future generations within your family, you know, not to even have tunnel vision of like doctor, lawyer, engineer, but like, you know, other panelists have said, Melissa said, there are so many other opportunities, like everything could be a job. So yeah, that's what I'd like to end on.
Yeah, don't hold on to the nose, say yes to yourself all the time, blaze a trail. Love it. Amrita, I do have one question here from an attendee. SALDEF has done an amazing job with its historic SICK PSA commercial with Comcast. I wonder if there are any other similar partnership and PSA opportunities you'd like to see for our community and its nonprofits, and what you personally hope to see one day in the media for us.
Yeah, you know, I feel privileged in this position to have worked in like the footsteps of people I came up with the SICK PSA, and that really kind of elevated our community on a national level. Comcast has been a huge partner for us. And right now we're actually working on a PSA for the 10th anniversary of Oak Creek coming in August. So that's coming in the future. And I hope to highlight these, you know, stories that can be easily forgotten, but using these reminders and 10-year marks to really highlight what the community has gone through and the activists that came out of it. And what I personally hope to see one day in the media for us is giving the mic to, you know, the local organizers, the local activists that are out there on the screen, scene, people that we know within our own communities, and get the recognition and like a broader, you know, Sikhs are not a monolithic group and we should not be treated as such. And I hope the media can represent that.
I'll go to another question. Looks like it's from Constance Tabora. Though the panel, thought the panel here has, throughout the panel, there's been a theme and the importance of the AANHPI community to tell their story, but it goes to say that many of us in our community inherently don't know how to tell our story. Factors like language barriers, not accepting experiences of trauma, or intrinsically believing their story is important. How do you find the life and vigor to tell your stories or support other stories? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I mean, I went through the Marshall Gans school story itself. That is the foundation of the Obama campaign in 2008. Every single person who was on that campaign, from the organizer all the way up top, had to do a story itself, the way that Marshall Gans developed it. And I mean, what I just did about the inherent conflict, like that's a story of self thing. I'm not a trainer. I'm not I don't know how to do it, but I don't know how to teach it, but I definitely learned how to do it. And I think having teachers and seeking out workshops and storytelling is really, really important. You're not going to get to do it yourself. I can't sit there and do what I just did about the inherent conflict of being an Asian American storyteller without having gone through that training, no matter how good of a storyteller I think I am, right? Like, if you need to have a sense of self-awareness about what you're trying to tackle, who you are, in order for you to believe in that story, for that story to be powerful, to resonate with other people. So I can't, I don't know if like, we can all go to Marshall Gans and learn it, but there are so many like story of self trainings that are out there. I know two friends who run them, one for women and the other one for Asian Americans, right? Like they are like they're out there. And I think it's important for us to seek it out.
Yeah, I mean, I can think back to, and shameless plug, my turn, is, my memoir, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. The book is actually divided into like 8 stories in middle school, 8 in high school, and 8 in college. And in those 8 stories in college, it's about how I became a writer and got into the writing program and the difficulties I had as a person of color, being the only person of color there, where I even, where the penultimate story is actually where I was in an advanced level fiction course and the instructor, well, first of all, I was the only, person of color in these classes. And so a lot of times they'd write really racially problematic things and I'd always call it out and she didn't like that. And so then, when it came time for me to turn in my story, I wanted to do something that was more authentic about, the Asian American experience. So I turned in a story about growing up in Chinatown and, all the other students loved it. But then she asked me to come to her office hour the next day. And she was like, first, you need to stop talking about race, because it's impacting the other kids, and the students. And the second thing she said is, yeah, this story is too good to be from an undergraduate. I want to know where you stole it from, And so this is a story that I've actually heard other people of color have said, oftentimes there's a suspicion amongst, particularly white educators towards the authenticity of our work. Meanwhile, they praise all the problematic work from the white writers. And so that is why I decided, I wanted to go to New York and help co-found a group of Asian American writers. It was a very specific mission on my part to go find other writers to help, grow, with each other and support each other. We started off, with workshops, and then we said, hey, we're having fun doing workshops together. Let's do a reading together. And we were having fun doing readings together. Why don't we just publish something together? And it just built and built and built, so that I think within 5 years, our budget was like 700,000 or something crazy like that. And we had the largest Asian American bookstore. We'd won the American Book Award. So it just goes to show you is that if you do not find the support system out there, then go out and create it. You know what I mean? And particularly now, when you have the internet, there's so many easier ways to connect. The way we had to do it back then was that we actually had to go racially profile people by going to public readings. And anytime we saw an Asian face, we'd like hand them a flyer and say, please join our writing group, But fortunately, you can do all that stuff online now and you connect with groups. But, so if you do not see it, go build it yourself. It's really possible. And then, the one last story I'll share about the Writers' Workshop is that, recently, I think it was the Atlantic magazine, had interviewed Minjin Lee and asked her, oh, when you were a struggling writer, did you think that you would be the one successful person when you took classes at the West Side Y or the Gotham Writers Group and stuff like that? And Minjin shared this story and said, well, I'll share an alternate story with you, is that I took a $200 workshop at the Asian American Writers Workshop where Jhumpa Lahiri was the teacher, and her fellow classmates were Kathy Park Hong, Lisa Ko, Ed Lin, you know what I mean? And so to think about all these really wonderful Asian American writers all gathered in this space, which was a community space, which was accessible, is just, the power of community, in my opinion, and so if you don't see it out there, go out and build it, and you'll find like-minded people, so.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Curtis, like, again, about finding community. And I think both those examples are great. I think also talking about Marshall Gans, you can find a bunch of his stuff online. He's an educator and he teaches people. I think there's even free courses on his, style of developing the story of self. But I think in both examples, it's actually doing it. When you want to become a pro basketball player, you're in the driveway or at the public court, like bouncing a ball, so you can't sit at home and wring your hands and be like, how do I become a great storyteller without actually telling stories or without actually writing? And fortunately, that's super cheap. I mean, I used to be so afraid as a younger person that things cost money because my family was poor. And I just realized like I can't let that stop me. I actually have my job. So, letting you guys know, I went to college for a couple years and I dropped out because I couldn't afford it. I still don't have an undergraduate degree. I got my job because I volunteered. I started as a volunteer and I taught myself my job through volunteering at organizations that needed people with a brain and with some ability and some desire to help their communities. And so you can do that, and sometimes even that can be intimidating. I remember like feeling like I can't walk into some organized volunteer, but holy crap, I'm desperate to hear any of them. And our deputy director of my museum started as a volunteer.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing. Yep, I think there's certainly something to be said about going out there and doing, and maybe not being great at first, but no one gets great without being bad at first. So I think there's something to be said about taking courage, kind of pushing yourself to really pursue that what you want to do. So I certainly think that's the case in storytelling. Looks like we have another question from another attendee. I'm curious to know how the artists and directors here bring their work to the communities they focus on. For example, are there often comp tickets for community-based organizations to attend screenings, or are there community screenings for the
That's a conversation and Melissa and I are actually having. We just did this with the Knicks at Tribeca. Obviously, it's a basketball story, but it's a story about Asian Americans. And the Knicks bought out an entire theater, and they invited season ticket holders, but for the rest of the tickets, they give them to all like the Chinese American organizations, like the civics organizations, community organizations that are in New York City. And it was like I wasn't expecting. I'll be honest with you, like when you create spaces like that for a movie like 38 at the Garden, like it was one of the most emotional experiences I have ever went through. Like people just came up to me in tears at the end, because with the help of the Knicks, like they made sure that the community that needed to see the first. So I think a lot of times it's making sure that have the right partners, and they are it's on their mind what community needs to see, like what movie first. We're hoping to recreate that experience in DC, which is why Melissa and I are actively going through that right now. But I can only speak from the perspective of 38 at the Garden. I'm sure Curtis has a lot more insight on that with the films that he's worked on. But I think it's just really important to be mindful. People like this is wild to say, but like it's still. I mean, I'll say it because it still needs to be said. Like people just want to feel represented. People just want to know that they're telling stories that feel at least like adjacent to what they've been through. And like sometimes they don't even have to watch what it is to feel that way. We screened 4 minutes of the film in Great Star Theater in San Francisco, Chinatown, right? Obviously, that's Jeremy Lin's home base. We told everybody it's 4 minutes of the film. Okay, it's just 4 minutes. There was a line around the corner, right? Like they had to live broadcast it for the people who couldn't get in. And I was like, you can't watch the movie. Like we told everybody very clearly, like, it's just 4 minutes. We have the premiere at Tribeca in a month. But like, I think it, and then like, I just think it's really important to say that it's like we feel very important. We feel like it's very important as storytellers that we tell the story. And sometimes we get lost in it. And especially like there's that moment when you realize that you're actually going to tell it and it's really, really exciting, right? But like, I think we just need the constant reminder that like on a very fundamental level, there's so few, it's still to this day, even though it's way better than what Curtis described 20 years ago, like it is still so small a catalog compared to everything else ever made about other people in this country, that people still feel that way and probably will for some time.
I think the challenge for for us who are making community projects is it's that balance, right? At the end of the day, these are careers, right? So we do have to make a living of it, and so hopefully we can find different places. For me, I've been fortunate enough where I've had enough mainstream work, whether it was working in, for the networks, where I now get residuals, or because I've got a big book deal with a mainstream publisher that allows me to sort of then do these side projects, like Dear Corky, where I am going to lose money on it, but that's a choice that I'm okay with, right? Because for me, it's more important just to get that film done and out there. But even say like with a film like Vincent Who, I had to make that transition because, I was literally coming off a network show and not making any money off of it. But then, at first I was just showing that film for free, right? The Vincent Who film. But then, it got expensive for me to do that, like to sort of fly out and like sort of show the film. And so I started asking people, well, you have to at least cover my cost. And, and eventually, it's hard finding this medium of how do you make a living and yet still stay committed to the community. And where I feel like, at least with that particular film, what I do is I put it online for free, right? So anybody can watch Vincent Who if they want. But if you want to bring me out to speak, then that actually is where I will charge for, because I feel like that's my time. But that's a decision that I've had to make, with this particular project. And I think you have to do it for each one. So like with Corky, the Corky film, I'm going to show it at a few film festivals for 1 year, but then after that, I will similarly put it online for free. I'll probably try to get it onto a streaming service like AANHPI so that, you can make a few $100s a year off of it. It kind of just pays for your internet or whatever. But, it is a balance, right? Because it's a struggle because you want to make community projects that are accessible to as many viewers as possible, but then you also know that, cost is oftentimes a barrier for people, and when you want to do certain things, like for instance, with my second film, Tested, it was a film about education. And I felt that it was very important for immigrant communities to have access to that film. So I had it translated into 4 different languages, like a Korean language, a South Asian language, a Chinese language, and Spanish actually. Oh, and in English. So I had 5 languages. But you know what? Who's going to pay for that? You know what I mean? You can't recoup your money off of it. But I felt it was essential to have immigrant families have access to this film. And so it's a cost that I decided to bear. So it's a struggle that we go through all the time. I'm sure Frank goes through it. I'm sure Melissa, Amrita,
I'm definitely going to lose money on American Gothic X, but it's worth it, right? It's hanging in the Audubon ballroom.
Yeah, right.
These are the sacrifices that you make. But like, to what Curtis said, like, I mean, HBO bought the movie because it's about basketball, because everybody remembers Bizzani, right? It's like the community message is sneaky. It's in there. I'm just keeping it real with you, right? Like, because most people are not going to watch it. They'll watch it because it's in there, but they're not going to watch it for that. And we're all going to have to find projects as artists that balance all of those things. It's red meat and it's vegetables. It's red meat and it's vegetables.
I think like from the side of exhibition, like you guys, I'm talking to both, and my kid is coming into the office. Okay. So I struggle too, because like I realize like you're it's a job and you can't do it for free.
Where's my banana?
It's like,
Hey.
she's such a ham too, so this is going to be a bad it's going to get really bad. But just realizing that like we were when we were kids, like we have to fight to show these works to the younger generations. And then at the same time realizing like I want filmmakers to keep making work as filmmakers. I don't want them to have to be waiters at night, just to tell pertinent stories. So where do I find that balance? It's super hard. Like we're in a moment now where people are like reaching out to You know, like maybe like saying like, oh, maybe we'll sponsor you next year or whatever. But I'm realizing like just I have to bust my butt. Like maybe I'm a film programmer and that's where my strong suit is, but like people have to get paid for their work, you know, and kids and adults, you know, I mean, there's a whole generation of adults that never saw themselves on screen. They need to see what is being made now too, you know? So just like I'm in that middle space, and it's like my obligation now to find money to pay out on both ends. I just got to do it. And that means, you know, looking for grants or looking for sponsors or just being creative about where I can find money. And it's hard, let me tell you, like I had a real moment this year where one of our feature films, and we're only screening a couple feature films in evening programs, like our festival's very small this year. Somebody, you gotta go. One of our films, which was one of our biggest films, dropped out because of distribution negotiations, you know? And I was just in this moment where I was like, do I give up? You know, this film, I feel it was so critical for our community, but I can't give up. I have to not just, you know, fill that hole, but also continue to support that film because they're telling an important story. And if that film comes out in another year, after it has gotten distribution, then all the better. You know, who am I here for? I'm not here to serve myself or to serve my ego. I'm participating in this film festival in particular to serve my community, and I just gotta keep that in mind and do the best that I can and evolve and teach myself how to do things like grant write or whatever if I have to.
Thank you so much for that. A delicate balance, an important balance. It looks like we are running up on time. Thank you all so much, Frank, Curtis, Melissa, Amrita. This has been such a great discussion. And it looks like I'm going to hand off the mic to Ching Cha to close us out. Thank you all.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you again, Curtis, Frank, Melissa, and Amrita, and our 2017 SNI alumnus, Neil, for your thoughtful conversation this evening. And thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed our third WLP session of the summer, we have 3 more coming up. WLPs are every Wednesday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern time via Zoom. Next week's WLP is Public Health and COVID-19, our stories, where we're going to be discussing the current state of public health with a focus on the effects of COVID-19 within the AANHPI community. You can register on our website at kapal.org and view all of our upcoming events. Please follow us on social media to learn more about our SNI programs at Kapal DC. Thank you to our 2022 sponsors for your continued support for our programs and continue to provide opportunities for AANHPI in public service. Thank you for attending our third WLP session of the summer. We'll see you next time. Good evening, everyone.
Take care.